So good morning, everyone, and welcome to A Clear Message, a workshop on plain language, writing, and design. And I'm just going to jump right in with my next slide. Okay, right. The anticipated outcome of this morning's educational enterprise is a knowledge-based set of skills and strategies that will enable participants to disseminate information with optimum efficacy. Or, if you prefer, in plain language, I hope you will learn something today that will help you communicate better. And that's what we're talking about. So the agenda today is we're going to look at what plain language is, why we want to use it, so the case for plain language, and we're going to just touch briefly on the literacy levels of adults, because sometimes it's quite surprising, the statistics around that for people to hear. And then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the plain language writing process. And it's a little bit of like going back to school and doing your high school English. We're going to be looking at some tools that will help you write in a way that people will understand your message on a first read. We'll look at how to plan what you're writing, so before you put it down on paper, and also some elements of design that help to make the document more readable. And then a review process, which is one that we often skip because we're all so busy trying to meet deadlines and get it out. Like Almira had warp instead of wrap around. We need to do that proofread and take that time to check what we write before we send it out. And as Almira said, she did send out the plain language PDF of the document, but for those who would prefer the hard copy, we will be mailing you a document like this. Everything I'm going to talk about today is in that plain language handbook. So you don't need to take notes, but except if that's your preferred learning style and it helps you to write down things, you can do that. A lot of what I'm going to do is have some examples, but there's also lots of that in the handbook. So why plain language? Well, we know that the need for everyone to have these skills is growing, because with computers, we've all become writers. We're writing emails and websites, and we're doing a lot more writing today than we used to. But not many of us have been taught to write for the modern workplace or the modern reader. And we read differently now for many reasons, partly because we're all suffering from information overload, but we tend to skim, skip, and scan a lot through documents and when we're reading on screen. And we also are having to deal with shorter attention spans. People don't have the ability and don't have the desire to spend too much time filtering through too much information. And so we have to get to the point as quickly as we can, and we have to make it as clear as we can so that it is understood on a first read. The difference with plain language is that it starts with the needs of the reader. So usually when we write, we write for ourselves. We write at our own educational level. We write from our own sort of level of knowledge. And usually we're most concerned with saying what it is that we want to say, that we want to share, rather than thinking about it from our reader's point of view and thinking about what is it that they really need to know or even want to know. We tend to want to say too much and without thinking about what it is that our reader really wants to know. So plain language writing often does mean unlearning old habits. And as we all know, that's hard to do because we're pretty attached to our old habits and we're often pretty attached to our writing style. Far from being unsophisticated, plain language writing actually takes a lot of skill and hard work. It's about writing to communicate rather than writing to impress. So what do plain language documents look like? They're actually quite easy to spot. And believe me, they are pretty few and far between. They're not that common. Plain language documents are often, it's clear communication. it's visually inviting you. When something is written in plain language, you actually want to read it. It's logically organized, which seems to be, in itself, that's kind of crazy. Why would somebody write something that's not logically organized? But believe me, it happens very often. And I've often said to people when I've read through a document, I said, well, why did you have all this information up here, where your key message is in the last paragraph? And they said, well, if I'd put that message in the first paragraph, they wouldn't have read all the other information. The truth of it is nobody's going to read all that information if they don't want to, and then they might miss the key message, which was hidden in the last line. And plain language documents, as I said, are easy to understand. So for just when I was looking with your meeting, where you're talking about making businesses and places accessible, we often think of that in terms of physical accessibility, but it's really important as well to think about it as information, how to make information accessible. So plain language documents are accessible, and they're inclusive, and they're universal. Everyone understands how to read a plain language document. Not only are they often, as I said, with these points here, but they're also often use a easy to read font size and type. Bullets are the friend of plain language because bullets help with that skimming and skipping through a document. And they use points of emphasis, so highlighting, underlining, bolding. Plain language documents make it easy for the reader to find out what is important and what it is that they must do. The layout doesn't overwhelm or intimidate. Not sure why I'm just going to, my slides are wanting to do. Let's try again. Sorry, my slide doesn't want to advance for some reason. There we go. Okay, so plain language document only covers often 3 to 5 points, less is more, common words and short sentences. And I already talked about the font, headings, giving readers practical information. When we write, as I said, when you're often writing from what you want to say, we want to give all the explanation, the rationale, the theory, the background, but our readers often really aren't that interested. If they are, they'll ask you for it. They want to know just what is it that I need to know and what is it that I need to do. So here is an example of a typical government type of communication that is not written in plain language. So you can see it is from back in 2015. Lots of information. Most people probably never bothered to read all of it because, it's kind of what they wanted to say. I actually just read it the other day for the first time, but it's a lot of sort of background information about what the government's doing. And this was for the return, the information for your tax return. And then government, and they have been doing a lot of work on plain language. This is actually a summary of what plain language is. Everything just got clearer. The most important information on the first page, a consistent look, so that's sort of visual, organized, logical, and the next year in 2016, this is what that document looked like. So that you can really see it's a good visual of the difference between something that's not written in plain language and something that is. So right, at the bottom, at the top of that form is the most important point. You have no amount to pay as a result of this assessment. That's all that I wanted to know, right? So a good visual. So why use plain language? Well, we are all experts in our own field, and it is our responsibility to make our information accessible to everyone. Every Canadian has the right to understand the information that we are presenting to them. Plain language is one way to do that. It ensures that each sentence is clear on the first reading, and it really helps us to better meet the needs of those that we are serving. As this lovely doctor said, well, yes, I suppose I could explain the test results in plain English, but then you'd know how sick you are. Well, if I'm that patient, I want to know that information so that I can know what I need to do about it. So, as I said, no one is excluded. the focus is on communicating the message rather than on trying to impress. It's on to be understood. Now, the benefits of plain language, as I said, first and foremost, people are more likely to read it. And we all spend a lot of time writing emails and creating brochures and posters and documents and reports. If we don't write them in plain language, they often aren't even read. And so then if it's not even read, well, for sure your message isn't going to get communicated. But also, as I said, it helps for people to read with understanding, which, as we know, is the most important thing. I mean, sometimes we can read something, but if we don't understand it, it doesn't help us know what to do. It's inclusive because it reaches people who cannot read well. So especially when you're working with lots of immigrants where English is not your first language, it reaches those people, it reaches people with low literacy. It also, though, is appreciated by busy people, and we're all very busy these days. Many people spend more than 40% of their time just dealing with emails. And so, as I said, that information overload, none of us want to work too hard at having to understand what the message is. And so if people understand better what we write, it helps to avoid mistakes and misunderstandings. So it saves you all those, those repeat emails and those clarification calls, where people, they don't bother to read what you sent out. They just say, they call you and just say, can you just tell me what it is I need to do? And you just, you give them the message nice and clear. And so we want to write that way. So ultimately it saves time, money, and it resources for the organization, and it also results in happier clients. Here's another example of a good example of what plain language is not. So City of Kamloops put up the sign at our new dog park up in the area where I live. And when that sign went up, I thought, well, this is just perfect, because who is going to read that sign? Nobody is going to read it. So the message is lost. There's way too many bullets. It's not logically organized. We've got bullets in there about health of dogs. We've got about cleaning up. We've got about drinking and smoking. And, there's just way too much information. Message, ineffective communication. And then next to that sign, after a plain language workshop, they put up this sign. Right. Unless your dog can do this, please be responsible, clean up after. Everybody can read that. We understand the message. They could have actually just put the picture up. A picture tells 1,000 words. But the difference as well in the perception of your client is when that first sign goes up, it actually makes the reader almost annoyed and angry, and you kind of roll your eyes and you're like, oh, this is so ridiculous. And you just don't respond positively to the message. When you see this, you smile, and you're way more likely to actually comply and clean up after your dog. So many people worry about plain language being dumbing down and being anti-intellectual. The reality of it is that, as I said to you before, it takes a lot of skill and hard work to make your document clearer. And many years ago, Jacob Nielsen, you see his name at the bottom there, he is a website guru down in the US. He was asked by a pharmaceutical company to plain language their website, to make their website more accessible to low literacy users so that they would spend more time on it and feel more satisfied with it. So he conducted some before and after studies of the website and came up with some rather surprising results. So we expected low literacy users to spend more time on the website, be more satisfied with it. But the unexpected result was that high literacy users also appreciated the plain languaged site much more and were more satisfied with it as well. And that's why I said, if you're worried that when you write in plain language, you're going to be perceived as being not professional or, not academic, that is not true. People are busy and nobody wants to work too hard to understand the message. So that's a good sign. The other thing, though, that we need to know is that it's not always appropriate to write in plain language. So if you're writing your thesis, for a master's degree, Or if you're writing a report for people in your organization who are all in the know and understand, you know, the jargon and the talk, and that then you can write obviously at a higher level. So you really have to consider, as I said, the needs of the reader. You have to consider the purpose of your document and who is reading it. And that will help guide you as to what level you want to write your document at. So it's not for everything. I just want to read you a quote from the Securities and Exchange Commission Plain Language Handbook. Plain language does not mean deleting complex information. Instead, it assures the orderly and clear presentation of complex information so the readers have the best possible chance of understanding it. And another quote by Steven Pinker in his book, Sense of Style: one should not confuse clarity with condescension. And I like that one, because that's that one, you know, where people, you think, well, if I have to say it simply, I'm being condescending, and it's not, I'm being clear. So those are two good quotes. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a short video. I love these TED Talk videos, and it basically is sort of a summary of what we've just talked about.
Do you ever feel buried in ineffective words at your place? Ever thought about how your organization comes across to real people? Or the fact that every day your organization is judged by what or the way your people write? You could say that words make your world go round. Chances are you could make a huge difference to both your reputation and your bottom line if you paid attention to the quality of those words. Plain language is the answer. It means your words don't get in the way of your message. Plain language makes everyone's life easier by making messages clear and getting rid of jargon, cliches, and clutter. Plain language saves everyone time and money. It helps citizens participate in government, and it's great for business. So how about creating a plan to change your writing culture? That means a change to the way everyone thinks about writing. At the moment, most of your people probably don't understand the business benefits of clear writing. And they're probably so busy writing emails and meeting deadlines for reports and other documents that they aren't stopping to put themselves in their readers' shoes. Plain language principles are actually quite simple. They involve things like identifying your purpose for writing, structuring content in the most useful way for your reader, using clear, precise words, and removing clutter. People usually like the change to clear, reader-focused language once they understand what to do and how it helps them, their readers, and their organization. So are you ready to make that change? Watch our next video to understand the damaging impact of poor writing at your place.
Okay, so that's a great short video to show to people if you want to encourage them to come on board with plain language, because it really helps when when the whole organization is sort of working on the same page and you're supporting each other with the writing and understanding the message. So as I said, we're just going to touch on the literacy levels of adults in BC. So that's a BC population 16 and over. And this is from 2013. The new one will be coming out soon, but it really hasn't changed that much. If anything, the numbers in the level 1 and 2 have actually increased, and there's lots of reasons for that. But basically, what we need to know when we look at this chart is that adults, to participate fully and succeed in society, need to be at a level 3 of literacy. And that is, you know, that means that they are able to understand the information that that's been sent their way on a daily basis, and are able to process it and understand what they need to do about it. So if we look at level 1 and level 2, we don't really have anyone who isn't able to read at all, who's illiterate, but it's being able to read with understanding. And so at level 1, that's very low literacy level. Level 2 would be, you know, people who can read a bit, but often don't understand what they're reading. And that's over 45% if you add those two figures up. So, you know, if we think it's almost half of our population are struggling every day with these sort of tasks. You know, safety information, many workplace accidents are because the people have misread or misunderstood the safety information that's posted. Medicine, health literacy, health, you know, medicine, those little inserts that come with your packages of medicine are difficult for people to understand. Bus schedules and maps, of course, are a challenge for people. Filling out forms are very problematic because they often include a lot of legalistic language because people feel you have to have that to make them legal, and that is not actually true. So, you know, just everyday tasks people are struggling with. And so that's where I said it's our job as the experts in that field to try and make our information that we give to people more accessible. And then you saw in that video, there was a second video about what happens when we don't use plain language and communications are not clear. It can lead to, you know, communication breakdown, which can create all sorts of failures and delays, unsafe workplaces, as I mentioned, and a bureaucratic culture. So I think, you know, if any of you work in those great bureaucracies of like education and health and government, where the language sometimes can create a lot of hoops for people to have to jump through, and for new people, new employees, or employees who may be new immigrants who go into those sort of cultures where there's lots of jargon and acronyms and legalistic language, it ends up in creating very disengaged employees and clients. And so it can create a lot of problems. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a great trick for how you can check the reading level of your document. So as I said, we want to read the Flash-Kincaid readability test. What that means is readability is an attempt to match the reading level of the written material to the reading with understanding level of the reader. And this formula was based just on, you know, grade levels in the US, and how it reaches its numbers is that it counts the number of syllables per word and the number of words per sentence. So you can't use this readability test on like a graph or a table. It has to be like a Word document, which is written sort of in sentences. Okay, so the way to set up the readability statistics on your computer is you bring up a Word doc on your screen, and then you go to File. Oh, so sorry, if you don't have the readability statistic on your computer enabled, when you do a spell check, when you do your spelling grammar check, you'll do your spell check, and after it's gone through all the errors and spellings, it will come up and it will just say everything's okay. All right. If you enable your readability statistic, you go to File, and then you click on Options, and this is all in the manual as well. And then you go to Proofing, and then you come down here, and do you see where it says Show Readability Statistics? You check that box. Most people, if you don't know about this tool, it's usually not enabled, so you need to do that. And then you click OK. And now if we do a spelling and grammar check on our document, the screen, it comes up with a screen that shows us the readability of this document. So it shows me here the reading ease. So that is what percentage of the population would be able to read this document with ease and with understanding is 80%. That's very high. Usually we find it's usually around 30 or 40% before you start writing in plain language. The grade level this document was written at is at a grade 4. So this document has been plain languaged for this workshop, and it has 0 passive sentences. That's another thing you want to enable in your proofing, is passive sentences. You want to aim between a 5 and 15% of passive sentences. And we're going to talk more about how writing in active sentences. So for the general public, you're looking at writing at about a grade 6 to 8 for general public. Grade 6 to 8, you're looking at trying to get around a 70% reading ease score. If you're writing for general public, where you know there's also maybe quite a high level of immigrants in the population, or groups where English is not your first language, then you want to really aim to write more at a grade 4 to 6 level. And even if you read this through this document, you would see it doesn't feel condescending. You don't feel talked down to. It's just clear, and it just gets the message across. Okay, so that is how you do that. So I'll just stop sharing that, get rid of that. So there's just again an example of it shows you. So the reading ease again is the percentage of the population that could read the document with understanding, and then this grade level is the grade level that it's written at. We will talk about this again a bit later when we talk about reviewing, but just remember that it's not a foolproof test, because it gives you an idea of the grade levels written, but it doesn't tell you if the document is written intelligently, or if it makes sense, or anything like that. So it's just one tool that you can use. Okay. Does anyone have any questions at this point, or should we just we're going to get right into the how-to now? We all good? And okay, Almira, are you checking the chat box and things like that if there's questions? All right. Okay, so if you are following along in your manual, we are basically on page 1011 right now, where we're going to talk about the plain language writing process. Okay, and this is what it will boil down to. So just getting down to that key message, the nitty-gritty. So it's how to take, say, a pamphlet or a document that looks like that. This was a document that was a sort of teen pregnancy brochure from the Okanagan, and take it to something that looks more like that. So you can just see the difference between that. You're looking at font, you're looking at white space, looking at headings, too much information. Here, much more appealing to the audience, bigger font, bullets, more white space. These are all the things that we're going to be looking at. Right, but before how do we get to that? The first thing we need to do is we need to plan. And this, again, just like the review process, we often don't spend enough time thinking about planning what our communication before we actually start writing it, because as I said, we're all working for deadlines, we're busy. So the plan is there's 4 steps to it, and in the manual you actually have on page 13 there is the writing plan that has these questions that helps you when you're thinking of starting a new document, how to work through it. So the first thing you want to think about is, what is the purpose of your document? Why are you even sending this email? Why are you creating this document? Is it to inform or educate or promote, mobilize, market, inspire? What is the purpose? Sometimes it may be, we may have multiple purposes, but it's a good idea to try and get down to what is your main purpose for sending this stuff, for doing this, writing this communication. The second thing you want to consider when you're writing your document is to think about your reader. Who is your audience? Who are you writing for? And again, sometimes it may be, maybe people in your organization will be reading it, as well as people out in the public. It might be a mixed audience, but try and think again of what is your target audience? And as I said, we all enjoy reading things that are written in plain language. Just think about those signs. So think about who your audience is. What is it that, are they familiar with this information? Is it new to them? What is with their education? gender, culture, all those sorts of things that you need to think about with your audience. If you're writing mostly for it, for an older people, it would be different if you were writing for a younger population. The third thing you want to consider is, what is your key message? What is it that what is it that you are trying to communicate? And again, thinking about it from your reader's point of view. What is it that your reader really needs and wants to know? And sometimes it's useful to think, if you could only write one sentence, kind of like an advertiser, what would it be? If you could only write one sentence, what would it be? And the fourth thing you want to think about is, how are you going to present that information? And sometimes you don't have a choice with that, but that's kind of the formatting. Often we'd have graphs and tables and things like that, but those they can be useful for showing comparison, but they're often hard for people to actually understand as well. So, okay, so like those key messages, advertisers, as I said, very good at getting those key messages, their slogans, where they just have that short amount of time to get it across. The same for us. Think about what, as I said, your purpose, your audience, your key message. When you're doing an email, you can put that key message in the subject line. The people, so that you can put your meeting, date, time, and that in the subject line, so that it hooks people in, and people don't even need to get into the body of the email. They're still going to get the information. Because remember, the purpose of plain language is to communicate, not to impress with too much information. So it's about losing all the clutter. So how to organize your information? As I said, get to the point as quickly as you can. Don't start with all the background information. If you really want to include that, put that in afterwards. As I said at the beginning, we often want to put that at the beginning because we feel if we put the key message in the first line, people won't bother to read the rest of it. That's their problem, not ours. That's thinking about what you want to do and not what they really need. So state the purpose, get to the point quickly. A good way of doing that also is anticipating your readers' questions and answers. That's a good way of organizing information too, is question and answer. Be logical, be practical, and remember, what you leave out is as important as what you put in. So sometimes people make a mistake when they're writing in plain language of just trying to get rid of all the information, and as we said, less is more. But you have to think about what's important information. You don't want to just leave out important information because you're trying to say less. So you've really got to prioritize and be practical. Many times we especially in letters, we repeat information, and we write the same thing in different ways. So that's something that when you're editing a document, you would get rid of all those sorts of things. Okay, and as I said, there is a plan in your journal, in your handbook on page 13 of how to do that. So let's talk about how to write in plain language. What does a plain language document look like? So the first thing, and this is kind of your English, English 101, back to high school. You want to write in active sentences. Use the active voice. What does that mean? It means that we're going to say, basically the focus is on who does what, or who needs to do something. Many times we write in passive sentences, kind of how we taught to write sort of academically, and often in bureaucratic cultures, government, they like to write in passive voice because it says something has been done, but it doesn't actually tell us who is responsible for doing it. So for example, policies should be reviewed annually. We don't know who's going to do them. Claims should be submitted. Issues will be or were identified. Something has been done, but it doesn't tell us by whom or who needs to do something. Active sentences are generally shorter. They're more vibrant, and it's very clear who needs to do what. So managers review policies annually. Staff identified issues. You must submit your claim to the claims department. It's been very clear as to who is doing the action. and who is responsible for doing what. So passive sentences, you want to write in that, and that's why it's good if you enable that passive indicator on your, sorry, active sentences are what you want to use. If you enable the passive indicator in your proofing, it will tell you how many passive sentences you've used in your document. The other thing you want to avoid is noun chains. And you may not have ever heard of that, but we tend to, again, when you're writing in sort of academic writing, we tend to change nouns, verbs into nouns. So when you're looking through your documents, look for those endings at ION, MENT, ANC. That's where you've changed a really nice brisk verb into kind of a dowdy noun. So for example, here's, and we often use it in headings, application, initiation, process. What is it that we're really trying to say? How to apply, right? So have a look for noun chains in your documents. Action verbs energize a sentence and they draw the reader onward. So that's just, it just simplifies it. Common words rather than technical jargon. And again, you know, when you're writing just for your colleagues or you're talking to your colleagues, it's fine to use your workplace jargon, and everybody's in the know. But if there was a new person in the room or you've got a client, it's the fastest way to lose your audience when you're using your technical jargon, your buzzwords that you use around the office. So we like to say, if it's a cat, call it a cat, not a feline. All right. So instead of saying patient's responsibilities for home convalescence will be reviewed by the physician before departure from the clinic, very wordy. Look how many words are in that sentence. Look how many syllables are in those words. You know, convalescence, physician. Those are not necessarily common words. We could just say, in plain language, before you leave, your doctor will explain how to take care of yourself at home, or how you should take care of yourself at home. So you'll notice also not just in the common language, but also it's a more positive tone, and we're talking about you in the sentence. So that's also been the personal pronouns as opposed to that third person. And we'll talk about that a bit more. Okay, so there's using common words rather than technical jargon. If you do need to use a technical word, you can, you know, just make sure that you explain what it is. Like if you wanted to use the word, say, myocardial infarction instead of heart attack, you know, make sure you say commonly known as a heart attack, or give a definition or an example. Here, so just some examples of jargon. Leverage advocacy avenues. This is off our city, our municipal website. You know, foster a corporate culture that positively impacts organizational performance. You know, encourage people to work, do their best is really what we're saying there. As Einstein said, and you knew a long time ago, if you can't say it simply enough, you don't understand it well enough. I've got my right in front of me. Yeah, can't with me, you don't understand it well enough. Okay. Why is my clicker not working correctly? Sorry. Okay, so the next thing we want to consider when we're doing writing in plain language is acronyms. And I'm just actually listening to Brenda there. There were lots of acronyms flying around in what she was saying, because, you know, we get so comfortable with the acronyms, and we just assume that people know what we're talking about. So, you know, even with, and again, it's just like with the jargon, if depending on who your audience is, you know, when you're just talking with your workplace people, it's fine. But again, it's the fastest way to lose an audience, and people feel embarrassed to ask if they don't know what the acronym means, and feel embarrassed to say, what does that mean? So acronyms are fine, but again, when you use your acronyms, when in doubt, spell it out. So the first time you use it, use the whole word. I noticed you had done that, Almira, in your presentation. You know, spell it out, use the whole thing, and then put the acronym in brackets afterwards, and then you can use the acronym afterwards. And let's not assume that you know, everyone understands, even RCMP, you know, new people to Canada would not necessarily know what that stands for. So even common acronyms, we should spell them out the first time we use them. And you don't want to use too many. And remembering also that acronyms in other workplaces, because sometimes we can have the same acronym, but it means a different thing in different organizations. Use a positive tone. So that was, and as I said, even again, when we're writing in sort of academic language, and that is kind of how, I mean, we all went to school and we were taught to write a certain way, and many of us went on to post-secondary education, and you still were taught to write in that sort of academic voice. It's often a third person and a lot of passive sentences. When we're writing in our workplace, it's a completely different, it's again, a different purpose for your communication. And so you have to learn to write in a different way. Using a positive tone, again, just invites the reader in, makes them more, makes the information more accessible to them. So instead of saying, do not fail to activate the alarm when leaving the premises, sounds very, professional and academic. You could just say, set the alarm, or please set the alarm when you leave or before you leave. When it is more appropriate to use that do not is when you are writing something that maybe is a warning. So like a safety thing, for example, if it's say for health, instead of saying this medicine is suitable for children over the age of 12, you might rather say, do not give this medicine to children under the age of 12. So sometimes the message is clearer when it's written in a negative tone, but most times to be more inviting for your reader, you want to write in a positive tone, and you want to write directly to your reader. Again, as I said, bureaucracy, sometimes we've been told you can't use you or we. So say if you're writing something from the city of Penticton, you can't refer to, it's like we plan to do this. You want to write the city of Penticton is planning to, but maybe you could do that in your first sentence. City of Penticton is planning to whatever, and then the next time is we. So you've identified who the we is. So what it does is when you write with using personal pronouns like you and we, it also helps establish a relationship between the writer and the reader. So instead of saying phone or email notification of the status of your application will be sent as soon as the decision is made, you just say, we will call or email you when we've made our decision. When you're using personal pronouns like that, it helps with the clarity. People know who you're talking to, who is supposed to be doing what. It interests and engages your reader. It also helps you get away, if you're using I, we, us, you don't have to be gender specific with the he, she's. So that helps with it. So as I said, it really engages the reader. It helps them feel like we're on the same team. And that, changes where otherwise when you write in that third person, it feels like there's that disengagement again. And you're not you don't feel like you're on the same level. This was just an example I found at Life Labs. They have obviously done some plain language work on their documents, and I thought it's nice and clear, lots of white space, good print. So instead of somebody writing there, do not, which is what you would normally see, do not approach the reception desk before you are called. It's wait here. You could have said, no, please wait here until, and even approach, I would have said, please wait here until we call you up to the desk, something like that. But you can see it's much more personable and easy to understand. The next thing we want to talk about is using short words in sentences. Now, this does not mean you want to write your document like a Dick and Jane novel, run, spot, run, jump, puff, jump. It doesn't mean 3 words in a sentence. You're looking at between 15 and 25 words per sentence, 1 idea per sentence. I love that quote by William Zinsser. There's not much to be said about the period, except that most writers don't reach it soon enough. And again, thinking about, you are not writing, a novel, but just a simple communication for people to understand. So a lengthy information-packed sentence will choke out the message, making it harder for readers to understand any portion of it. You don't want people to have to reread the sentence to understand what it is you're saying. So you just want to obviously, again, write instructions. This, I haven't put a slide in this, but in the order that you want them carried out. A short while ago, there was a software package came out that was released. And in the package, it said, the terms used in chapter 5 are defined in chapter 8. So please read chapter 8 before reading chapter 5. That's not very well planned. So we want to be logical, practical information, can separate out important points. So bullets are a friend of plain language, and we'll talk more about bullets when we talk about format and design. You don't want to use too many, but you can see how, you know, just especially when knowing that, well, a lot of our reading now is done on screen. And when we read on screen, we tend to move our eyes down, not so much across the document. We tend to skim, skip, scan, looking for the information that we want to use. And you can absolutely use all these tools that we're talking about today. You can use in any documents, right, and in emails. Another thing to think about is lists. Lists are good too, because as I said, you know, lists are often made out of bullets. And but when you do your lists, make sure they're in the same grammatical form. So your verb or your noun is in the same grammatical form. So here's an example where the grammatical form is not parallel. 3 healthy habits are getting 8 hours of sleep. You should eat 3 balanced meals. It is important. You need to have it written in the same grammatical form. 3 healthy habits are getting 8 hours, eating, exercising. You could make it even better by saying getting rid of the ing endings. 3 healthy habits are sleep 8 hours each night, eat 3 balanced meals, exercise regularly. So that's how you want to do your forms. And you'll notice, once you've done these workshops, you'll notice sometimes lists are not that well done either. When you do your list like that as well, to simplify for plain language, you can get rid of capitals and you can get rid of the periods. So, you know, it just, again, makes it easier to read and takes out more clutter. And then we're getting to the end. There's just a few more tools you want to think about. You want to leave out wordy phrases and unnecessary preambles. So again, when we wrote an academic, we often write in the event that, in view of the fact, it is important to add that, in this regard, it is interesting to note that, you know, those are those unnecessary preambles leading into. All they do is they put up barriers, they create clutter, and they switch people off. So you just, as I said, you're competing with a lot of other distractions in people's world. You want to get to the point as quickly as you can. And then with unnecessary, with wordy phrases, some other examples would be at the present time, we could just say now, or in the event that, if. Another one would be, for example, a large number of, more. So it's just, you know, cutting it down, removing the clutter. They're kind of pause mechanisms. Simplify your choice of words, right? Best looking for, trying to find a word that is familiar, would be the most familiar to the most people. Sometimes it's a good idea to pull out your thesaurus and look for, you know, other words, because it's not always, that's when I said it takes skill. It's not always easy to think of an easier word. So there's just some examples. You know, we love to endeavor. Let's just say try. You know, strategize, plan. So just keeping it simple. And then the other thing you want to do is leave out most intensifiers. They're unnecessary. I love the intensifier really. I found it's really important, you know, and I really hope you it's important. They tend to become repetitive in writing, and they're unnecessary. And if you, for no other reason, if you don't want to sound like Donald Trump, leave out your intensifiers. He loves them, you know. It's a very, very good friend, and it's so, so important. He uses a lot of intensifiers. Intensifiers not only fuzz up a writer's prose, but they can undermine the intent. All right, let's watch a video. Oh, sorry, here's an example. Activate switch to operate. We could just say, push the button. Love this video.
We all know the scene. Dorothy closes her eyes and repeats the Good Witch's mantra. No coordinates exist like one's domicile. No coordinates exist like one's domicile. No coordinates exist like one's domicile. Only Dorothy doesn't say that. She says 5 one-syllable words. There's no place like home. Each a word you probably learned in your first year of speaking. Each perfectly concise. It's not that L. Frank Baum didn't have a thesaurus. It's that in most cases, $10 words fail. Would Aerosmith have had a hit with Ambulate This Direction? Probably not. Would Patrick Henry have ignited a revolution by saying, "Provide me with liberty or bestow upon me fatality"? Unlikely. When it comes to words, bigger isn't always better. $10 words are rendered worthless if they're not understood. That's not to say every piece of literature should be written at a 4th grade reading level, but it is important to know your audience. If you're a novelist, your audience is probably expecting 300 pages of vivid descriptors. At the very least, they're expecting you won't use the same 50 words to fill those pages. But most of us don't have the luxury of a captive audience. We're competing against a whole world of distractions, and we're fighting for space in an attention span that continues to shrink across generations. So get to the point already. Variety may be the spice of life, but brevity is its bread and butter. So when it comes to $10 words, save your money and buy a Scrabble board.
Great video. Okay, so now I'm going to put you guys to work, and I'm going to give you a few minutes to see if you can take this paragraph down to 3 words. So see if you can identify the key message in this paragraph. Some people like to say ensure clarity, but then again, we're thinking that isn't necessarily that clear, right? What does ensure clarity mean? Whereas remove unnecessary words tells you exactly what it is we're trying to say. All right. So we talked about planning, what to do before we start writing, and then we've just been through very quickly a whole lot of tips on how to write in plain language. So that's kind of your toolbox. And when we do this workshop in person, as I said, this first time we've actually been doing it on Zoom, but when we do it in person, we ask people to bring a document with them. And then as we go through those writing tips, we have time. The workshop generally is ideally more interactive, and you have time to actually look at your document and look for some of those tips that we're talking about, you know, the third person, the passive sentences, things like that, and you can start working on it. This part now that we're talking about is the review, test what you write. And again, as I said, we often don't take the time to do this because we've got deadlines, and we're just trying to meet them, and so we get it done and we send it off. And it's so important, especially if you think about, and I'm sure many of you do, we cut and paste quite often, especially when we're applying for grants and we have to say the same thing over and over and over. So we cut and paste in, or sending out notices. You must review, because sometimes when we cut and paste, we miss that we've still got the old date in there, or some information we haven't corrected. Also with autocorrect, sometimes it changes words, and if we don't reread a document before we send it out, the whole meaning of our message has changed. So we need to take that time to edit. And what you're doing when you're checking your document is you're looking for those things we were talking about. You're looking for your jargon words, you're looking for your acronyms, your legalese, you're looking for unnecessary preambles and wordy phrases and tensifiers, maybe too many of the word that. You're looking for having changing verbs into nouns. So as I said to you, those different endings of words. A good way to check your documents, take a day away from it, come back and read it the next day. Read it out loud works really well, because you will, as you read it out loud, when it's not clear or if the sentence is too long or it gets a bit clumsy, you know that's something you need to work on. You want to get somebody else to read it. Be open to feedback. That one sometimes is a bit hard because, as I said, we're attached to our writing style. The best way to test a document, if you're writing it for an audience, specific audience, is to get someone in that audience to read your document and give you feedback. Make sure that it's understood. Test it on your audience. You can also remember you can do the readability test on your document, which will give you an idea of the reading level of it. And that, as I said, it's just kind of a grade level. Remember, when you're checking your document, punctuation. Punctuation is your friend, right? I like cooking my family and my pets. Use commas. Don't be a psycho. But as I said, in bullet lists, you can lose the periods and the capitals. And there's the readability one. So here's just an example of a document we did. These physical literacy kits and Kamloops for this organization called Play Kamloops, which is physical literacy and something, stands for something. And so you can see how we're looking for those multisyllabic words, some words that we might want to look for a more common word to use instead. You can see there's quite long sentences here, no headings. And then once you've done a plain language audit on it, it could look more like that. So clearer, shorter sentences, more simpler words. You've got some bullets in there and just more inviting and easier to read. Again, Albert Einstein, any fool can make things bigger, more complex and more violent. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. But since I learned about plain language, which was I learned about it as part of my job, and I do write in my emails pretty much in plain language, short, simple, to the point. My book that I wrote on reading success at home for parents is written in plain language. It's not very accessible. It's accessible to people, and it has been so well received because people, as I said, we all like it when it's just easy to understand. So now we're going to talk about format and design, and that's on page 21 in the document in your handbook. And this is just, how are you going to put that information on the page? Some of the tools that work well in plain language is headings and subheadings, because they kind of act as guideposts for you to move through the document. And headings and subheadings, as again, work well for those modern readers who skim, skip, and scan. It helps you go to the sections of the document that you're interested in reading and that help you get to where you need to go. And also it helps you with organizing information. Subheadings are good because if we are doing lists and bullets, many times if we just have the heading, we're going to have too many bullets under that heading. So if you have subheadings, then you want to have a maximum of 3 to 5 bullets under each heading. You want things to stand out, to make things stand out in your document, and that would be using tools of emphasis. So bolding, as you can see just on the slide, really does help the eye just immediately drawn to it. Again, with any tools of emphasis, you don't want to overuse them because then they become redundant. So bolding helps words stand out in the passage. Underlining is good for headings as well. Italics are harder to read, and so you don't want to overuse them. They're good for captions on photos and things like that. Or, if we're doing a quote, you could put it in italics, but it is harder to read. You do want to have lots of white space. Let the page breathe. I'm sure if you think back to that document from the government on the tax, where there was a lot of print, when it's text dense, it's off-putting. You don't even want to read it. And I'm sure some of you have done what I've done, is when I've written something and I want to get all that information in, and I've had to, I've made my margins narrow so that I can put more information on the page, fit it all onto one page. You don't want to do that. Instead, we need to relook at the information and figure out what it is that we don't need to say, or what are we saying that we want to say, but our readers don't actually need to know. And I said, if people want more information, they will ask you for it. So how do you have lots of white space? You can increase the size between your lines. It also depends on what font you're using, and then bullets for points. If you just use bullets, don't necessarily use numbers unless the order of importance is of it's 1, 2, 3. Then you would want to use that. As I said earlier, be careful with format and design, with how you present your information. Like if you were doing questionnaires or surveys, make sure they're consistent. And I mean, I'm sure you're all surveyed out if you're anything like me, but if you are creating a survey, make sure you only really ask what it is that you need to know. Don't just ask a whole ton of questions just because. And as I said, with forms, you have to be careful. They have the worst reputation because they're often, there's a lot of unnecessary legalistic stuff on forms. And many clients have actually won cases now because they've signed forms without understanding what it was they were signing. So it's more important that they understand what they're signing rather than, and it doesn't make it legal. It doesn't make it not legal if you're not including legal language. Okay, so headings, bullets. Here's an example of a poorly designed pamphlet that is using bullets, but way too many bullets, no heading. This was designed for seniors. Computer programs for seniors. Well, you can imagine it was not successful, and it went through a plain language audit, and they came up with something more like that. Bigger font, which is good if you think of your audience, and again, as I said to you before, sometimes a question, anticipate what your readers' questions are and organize your information like that. So how long the closet is, cost anything, and a few bullets under each question. If you overuse bullets, it looks like someone took a shotgun to your document, so you don't want that. But bullets are, as I said, the scanner's best friend. Another thing you want to consider in format and design is font type. So there's two different types of font. There's the serif font and the sans serif font. So if you look at that, you can see the serif font, and the most common one is Times New Roman, which is what we often use for printed documents. So a serif font has hooks and tails on the letters. You can see like little feet on them. And what that does is it helps the eye move across the page. So it helps us move from left to right over the centers, makes it reading easier. And that font is definitely better for printed documents, is a serif font. For on screen, a sans serif font is better. So that is, for example, the bottom two examples there, Verdana, Calibri, Arial. Those are examples of a sans serif font, just clean letters. And what that font does is it tends to bring the eye down. And as I said, when we read on screen, we're scrolling down. So that's also a good font to use for headings, because you're heading and then you move down. Nice and clear. So the brochure that you have, the handbook, is the headings we use to sans serif font, and then the actual body of the document we use the Times New Roman font. There has been some evidence that Verdana, which is a sans serif font, is the easiest font to read on screen because there's bigger spaces between the letters. So I have that set for my email. And there's also been some research done that the font Helvetica is the font that is easiest for seniors to read. Helvetica. So, and on Kindle, because I believe the pixels or whatever, it's high enough that when you're reading on Kindle, you can have a serif font. But just generally on our computers and that, the sans serif font is better if it's on screen. There's just some more examples. The Helvetica is the bottom one there, on the, that's for seniors. Okay, so, all right. And then the other thing you want to consider is type size. And many times we have our type size, many brochures are written with a type a 0.10 or 11. That is too small. And again, sometimes we make it the font size smaller so we can put more information into the document. So a minimum would be a 12-point font. And then, as again, thinking of your audience, you know, for older people, probably, you know, the bigger font is even better, 14. And obviously that would not be true for my PowerPoint. I would probably have more like a 26 or 30 size font, but font size is important. Another thing to consider in formatting is your margins. So that is not when I was talking about narrowing your margins in your document, you know, that's more for the white space. You want to keep your margins big, but your margins of your text. So if you have a fully justified, if you have a fully justified margin, so that is that top paragraph is written with a fully justified margin, and that is often used for reports because people think it looks nice, it looks smart because you've got, you know, straight lines on either side of the page. It's harder to read because what it does is it causes this varied spaces between the letters, and so it's not, your eye just doesn't read it as easily. So the best is to just have a left justified margin, and then the right side is ragged, and that is just where it's just much easier for your eye to move over read the paragraph. Another thing to consider is using capitals normally. So I'm sure you've all had the experience of reading a paragraph or something where it's all, or an email where it's all written in uppercase letters and capital letters, because the person writing it thought that this is really important information that I want you to pay attention to, and I'm going to write it all in capital letters. It's much harder to read because the shape of every word is then a rectangle. And also, it's often not well received because it feels like the person's yelling at you, right? So here, actually down in the States, they've applied this to their road sign. So if you look at the road sign on the left, it's all in capitals. It's much easier to read those words on the right. And the reason is because when we write in mixed case letters, the shape of every word, it has a unique shape, right? We're going up and down, and our eyes actually read the horizon of words. So remember that. I find adults often do like to write in uppercase. That's one of the things I talk about in my workshops. When they're writing words for their kids to read, they tend to write them in capitals, and it's harder for the kids to read. So mixed case is good because it gives the word their unique shape. And again, remember, lots of white space. You can do that by, having spaces between your paragraphs, changing the spacing in your lines, and remembering to be aware of color contrast. So sometimes that's not well done in brochures and that, where we choose bright colors or dark colors, and then we print black on blue. Might, harder to read. Contrast is good. Black type on light colored paper is the easiest to read. Soft blue or gray with black type is easy on the eyes. When we do white font on a dark background, it's fine for just headings or making something stand out, but it's harder to read again. So you don't want to do your whole document like that. At the back of the manual, you'll find there is a section on email etiquette, because we are finding that people are spending a huge amount of time on just dealing with emails, sending and receiving emails, up to 40% of typical working day, and it's increasing. Many of you are on autopilot, rapidly clearing your inbox and pushing out lots of your information. Consider your recipients' needs and remember how overwhelmed they also feel about too many emails. So again, just being mindful, about whether you do need to send that email or not. You know, be mindful of those FYI for your information emails that that person might be receiving from multiple people. Everything we've talked about, really, you can apply to your emails as well, your email etiquette. Particularly with smartphones, people, you know, we often are checking our emails on our phones when we're out of the office or away from the office, if we're even in the office at this time. People don't like to scroll. So try and fit everything onto your, you know, keep it short so that it can just be on one screen. Rather send, if you've got multiple questions or points, rather send multiple emails that people can send a quick response to. Remember when we were talking about getting to the point as quickly as you can. So in a letter, you would have a subject line, like, you know, reference, and put the main point in your subject line. In the email, you can put it right there in your subject line. So people don't even necessarily have to open it up. They already know what the point is. And there's a great book called The Hamster Revolution that talks about managing emails before they manage you. And that is basically it. I was going to just mention about graphics. Graphics are also really, or pictures are important in plain language, because as you saw with the dog sign, sometimes, you know, a picture can tell the message without any words. So making sure that, you know, you do use pictures to help communicate the message, but again, they need to add to it rather than detract. So that was a lot quicker than we thought, which is good, because it's hard to just listen to somebody talking to you.